Hey, got some questions here. So if it looks like I'm looking off to the side, I'm just going to read the questions off the iPad here. When doing eccentric heart work that is long duration, steady state in nature. So eccentric heart is what I call long, slow duration, cardiac output. They all mean the same things. I typically will use terminologies that describe the adaptation that this type of training can accomplish. But that's actually very relevant as this question goes on. Is there a general timeline, like 4 to 6 weeks, for example, for positive adaptations to occur that would allow them to progress to other forms of eccentric heart work that's more interval based, like 90-60? I'll explain what that is in a second. I realize some people I think he left out the word might not be conditioned enough to start right at 90-60. So that's correct. Now let's get some terminologies here. When you are under threshold and you are primarily using aerobic systems south. So we need to probably be lower than threshold, lower than VO2 ranges here. Now, why is this important? You have relatively lower heart rate. And when you have relatively lower heart rate because of the demand, you do have the opportunity to fill the left ventricle more than you would if you had a higher heart rate. And what can positively adapt from this, which is the question, is that, and I have described this the same way many, many times, as this is the left ventricle, it fills up and it creates this eccentric contraction. And it's almost like this, sort of like this plyometric impact to punch out that a more aggressive, a more favorable ejection fraction, how much of the blood is actually getting out. Now, the question is, how long does it take? If the question is asking how long does it take for that eccentric quality of the muscle, that takes a very, very, very long time. So shame on me, even though we talk about this in EPP, you should get it. It's very, very good. We're still going to call it eccentric, and we explain why. I've already done that to some degree. But to actually create that specific adaptation, it will take hours of individual efforts over a significantly long period of time, one that would likely not apply to a commercial fitness setting. So Charlie, why are you calling eccentric heart? Well, because we're trying to understand the difference of what happens in lower heart rates and higher heart rates. For instance, why heart rate alone cannot answer all the questions that you may have in terms of cardiovascular conditioning. And that is a significantly different thing than fat loss. Cardio for fat loss is different than cardiovascular conditioning for cardiovascular conditioning and health. So now, how long would it take to run these slow, long duration efforts before you went to 90-60? So let's define 90-60. 90-60 means you're gonna wear like a heart rate monitor or even hold on to whatever is reliable and valid. Doesn't even have to be valid, I guess. We're just gonna stick with it. And you're gonna go as long and as hard as you can. You'll probably go harder than longer because there is value here that you can start to get into some maybe more intense or even sports specific, maybe sports special interval ranges by getting your heart rate up to 90% of your max. So you just touch it, you just tap it. As soon as it dings or as soon as you see 172 or whatever it might be, 160, 150, whatever the number is, and then you either stop or coast until it's 60. Now it's 90-60, 90-70. You can pick any number and then just match the adaptation or what you're trying to accomplish with those conditionings. You can do 160. We also have 180 for combat athletes. So there's lots of different options that you can do. But certainly if you can't even touch 90, that means something. And if it takes 9 minutes for you to actually touch 90 and then get back down to 60, that's the question here. How long should it take for you to get from these parameters a long, slow duration where you're working on the eccentric heart, you're working on maintaining efficiency at a lower heart rate, because there's a lot of other things that happen with those eccentric heart protocols. And 90-60, if you average it out, it is very, very favorable. And of course, typically, if you're going really, really hard and getting that 90 up there as quickly as you can, the 60 will be longer. So the work to rest ratio is more favorable to the less expensive, easier, oxygen-laden energy systems. I don't know the answer. I think resting heart rate is going to be a big component here, but resting heart rate may not always be how quickly you come back down, and we know that. And we know that some of the best athletes, these repeat explosive athletes such as hockey, the best ones are the ones that get their heart rate back down the fastest. So I think the answer is Well, how long does it take? Maybe every 2 weeks, you're going to try this impact and see where we're at. Are we getting this type of training in? A lot of this answer also is going to be on the culture of how this individual is training. Does everything have to fit into an hour in this commercial setting? Or is it open gym? Can they do stuff on their own? Can they work on this? 90-60 you can do every day, just the same way you just do 60-70, for 2 hours while you're watching a movie. In my mind, we're achieving a lot of the same things minus any considerations for orthopedics. So I don't really know the answer other than more. It will get you closer to a very reasonable interval time of where you're going to get down to 60 and as quickly as possible so that you can bring the heat again for that 90. I think going to 90-70 is very, very reasonable. 90-80 is going to be all hell for somebody that's really, really deconditioned. They're not going to get a lot of quality work there. So I think you just do it as long as you have to. I don't know the number. I don't know how quickly different people are going to adapt. I think a lot of their development is going to answer this question as well, meaning what did they have previously and then what did they keep? Was there a significant amount of peripheral vascularization adaptations that they still kept, so that when they address these primary central mechanisms of the heart and the lungs, those not peripheral mechanisms, but I'm saying less central, when you have all of the venules and arterioles and capillaries, so that everything can become more efficient, both getting blood and oxygen to the working muscle and then getting it back to the heart. All of those things, how you show up, you may not have the big central markers, but you may have some of the other things. And you might also have lots of mitochondria that can allow certain types of 90% to not be as demanding. So all of these different combinations lead me to not be able to answer other than do it as long as you need to and you're getting good quality work, especially if you then are going to stay at that 60 to 70% for 30, 60, 90 minutes, etc. How much ground are they covering? And you know that their outputs are improving the same way you would like to see those outputs improve on a 90-60 protocol. So I don't know the answer. Okay, same type of question for progressing from 90-60 to explosive cyclic repeat. Like there was a golfer that was not conditioned enough to do the explosive cyclic repeat. They could not recover in 54 seconds after 6 seconds on the bike. So we did 90-60 and we built them up. Is there a specific time frame, or do we just monitor the resting heart rate? You just monitor the resting heart rate. So this is relatively same question, going from A to B and then B to maybe, I think there's probably lots of other options in between that'll be less explosive than the ECR, explosive cyclic repeat. But something to consider in the explosive cyclic repeat, because you're only going 6, maybe 12 seconds, the likelihood that your heart rate is going to get very, very high is not very, very common. So we're going to look at a return heart rate of about 110. So if you can't get down to 110, and even then in some situations that's not going to be the case, depending on just where people are at and what they can tolerate in terms of that lactic tolerance. So 110, if they close their eyes, what color do they see? And we're going to match that up to the Borg scale. If they do ground to a number on the Borg scale, what number is that? I think the number should be 3.5. If you want to do 3, whatever you want, that's where we would use that as well. And then also grounding to the Borg scale, there's words for certain numbers, and we want to see whatever the words would be at 3.5 or less. And what we're doing is we're judging that based on when the clock dings. So if your heart rate is not down to 110, I'm not talking about 112, I'm saying you're still at 123. Yeah, then this is an issue. So you get one time, and then if you just wait, then that just basically tells you that these protocols, you have to wait longer. So you have a choice. You can meld a little bit from the protocols that we have talked about. Use a different protocol that's applying the same relative components of science. So if we're going to go 654 and instead you want to go 6134, well, that's totally cool. And is that going to deliver what you want? In this case, for a golfer, might be very, very useful because of the work to rest ratios that you see in golf. And we've talked about those in a significant level, especially as it relates to motor skill acquisition and how golfers practice. So there's nothing wrong with taking a longer protocol. Is it worth it? That's really where you have to answer that question. And I think what are you training for is going to be part of that answer. You would also use power output if you can. So that's easy on a bike, that's easy on a Versa climber, not as easy on kettlebell. There's certain technologies that I think are pieces of garbage. They measure you, they don't measure the kettlebell, so I don't think those are useful. I think a force plate would be useful. But you have to have a force plate. I don't think you need a force plate to actually get into these conditions. If you start to feel that you're not popping as hard, or as a coach you see them starting to gas a little bit, you should be able to tell if someone's a very skilled kettlebeller, they're going to start to lose it a little bit. Again, you get one round and then you get a chance to bring up the heat. The second round, you're out. And then of course, form breakdown. So again, if you want to pick things that you're pretty good at, so that if your form does break down, then you really can blame it on the accumulation of acidosis when not using an internal or external measure such as heart rate or distance, power, et cetera, et cetera. Something internal load, stuff that happens inside your body; external load, something that happens outside your body. Form breakdown would be possibly a third category, but not one that is always going to be a problem. So that's up to you to decide what technical breakdown is or isn't. So again, it's not a simple thing. And if somebody is so out of shape, I think we should then go to other types of resistance training programs that are using relatively lower loads, and we're just basically moving with weight rather than strength training and using protocols that would actually create adaptation to improve the contractile elements force production. We're not going to do nothing, but we're going to use relatively lower heart rates and just start to teach a lot of these movements with very, very intelligent, low-level boot camp type of training. Totally fine, whether it's very specific or not. EPP has lots of different protocols that would still fit into what I would call eccentric heart, where you're lifting weights, but you're not lifting very, very heavy weights because you're in this circuit type of thing. It's not competitive, so you don't have all of the other things that something like fitness sport would have. I don't even want to say the name, even though I don't know that's the real thing. I do a pretty good job of filtering my feed, so I don't see a lot of that stuff anymore. So regardless, even that in itself is a concentric heart protocol, and certainly not part of what we're discussing here, but also very, very useful. So, I think sometimes we look for objective standards. I don't think we have them with these particular questions. When you have somebody who's really, really deconditioned, I think you just got to stick with whatever protocol puts them in the best situation to adapt from, in this case, central cardiovascular, then peripheral cardiovascular, because you'll never get there unless in very, very odd, unique situations. Hopefully that makes sense. And hey, I haven't asked you in a while. If you have seen a leprechaun, say yeah.